first introduce Mary Bocage from the NIDA Board of Directors, who will be introducing Joseph. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff. And then Kinawea. Hello, everyone. Mary Bocage Nishtakas, Anishinaabe Kwayandao, Makwadodam, Nibising Robinson Huron Treaty Dunjaba. I'm Anishinaabe Kwe from Nipissing First Nation and Robinson Huron Treaty Territory in Northeastern Ontario, and I'm not too far from Joseph's home community of Wickwamacong. I have had the pleasure of listening to Joseph speak a few times, and just really honored to have him here today. I do want to mention too that I am a new board member. I just joined in January, and I'm really honored to be here today. So Joseph Pitawanakwat is a Ojibwe from Wickwamacong, married with one daughter. He is the founder and director of Creator's Garden, an Indigenous outdoor and now online education-based business focused on plant identification beyond sustainable harvesting and teaching everyone of their linguistic, historical, cultural, edible, ecological, and medicinal significance through experiences. His lectures and intensive programming is easily adaptable to different audiences and has been successfully delivered to a variety of organizations, including over 100 First Nations communities, 20 universities, and 12 colleges, and dozens of various institutions throughout Canada and the United States and beyond. He is currently a master's student in the MES program at York University. He has learned from hundreds of traditional knowledge holders and has uniquely blended and reinforced that knowledge with an array of Western sciences. Joseph, I'd like to pass the mic over to you.
All right, thank you so much. That's awesome. Yeah, that's me. I normally spend all of my time focused on medicine, plant medicine, and yeah, for the better part of the past decade, I guess, really focused and dedicated to that. I have been having I've been having a lot of fun with that work, and always growing and evolving. Just one thing that is kind of like a motto that we have is to always be maximizing our opportunities, maximizing our ability to grow or impact. And so all of the work that I do, that's like one of the most important things. And so when I started learning about medicine and providing it to folks, it was really incredible because, well, long story short, it used to be real bad. When I was growing up, when I was in high school, yeah, it was real bad. Until I started to find, culture and language, visiting with my grandma, learning about medicines from her. And then I started finding plants and then providing these plant medicines to people. And that's where things got real fun because it was helping. I've always had this sincere obsession with healthy. And, ever since I was very young, realizing that this is a really hard term to like actually define, like what is healthy? It's kind of interesting, but I saw plant medicine, as like a very powerful pathway to be able to achieve a certain amount of healing. Some of our first stories, with idiopathic conditions like arthritis and hormone issues with hot flashes, and COPD was another one of those first idiopathic conditions that I really had an experience with in my community. Idiopathic meaning basically there's no care other than comfort and pain management sort of associated with these, meaning we don't understand what causes the disease or anything. There's no medication to help lower symptoms and improve quality of life. And so when these medicines were helping, I was like, holy man, this is wicked. And then all the while finding and, confirming my identity as a Anishinaabe person. And so it was really powerful healing experience for me too. But I was like giving medicine away finding all these plants and preparing them with my grandma, and then people were getting them from me, and then having these insane experiences of tremendous healing. So I was like, oh wow, I'm hooked. This is like right up my everything I ever wanted to do, because like academically, because I was so bad, I just like barely passed and failed so many different things. I was in a 5th year of high school, and I was so obsessed with health and healing and wellness that my plan was to, like 20-year plan was to upgrade my high school credits, and then go into a pre-health sciences course, get into a nursing program, get a bunch of years of clinical experience before applying to like a med school, and it being a part of this whole thing. And then I was just kind of like, whoa, this is not a very healthy plan considering my past. So I was just like, yeah, let's focus on this medicine stuff. And then my community really quickly thrusted me into a teaching role. I was teaching about medicine in my community, and then in other communities, and then all of a sudden now, like working in well over 150 different Indigenous communities, over 250 different institutions every single year. Every day I'm in and out of multiple different spaces, thanks to the pandemic, to say that in a weird way. But doing things virtually has been pretty fun and very, very impactful. But always maximizing my impact, always making sure that I'm doing the best that I can with the tools that I've been given. And so working with medicine was great, but there was a barrier at the level of the physician, usually because physicians are not taught about plant medicine, and plant medicine operates by way of chemistry. Chemicals inside of the plant have a physiological function that results in generally the restoration of a certain ailment or disease, that that's gone wrong. The medicine is going to have chemistry to be able to fix that. And pharmaceutical medication is chemistry that helps with a certain issue. And so because the physician is not taught about plant medicine, there's no way that they can ever confirm that, oh yeah, this is okay. They're not taught, they're not trained. And so I was like, well, like at this point too, there was multiple deaths in Canada of physicians who withdrew treatment from Indigenous patients who were persistent on using traditional medicine. And some of those patients ended up passing away as a result of this conflict. And so I was like, well, it's a real easy thing. You know, we could help with this. All we just have to learn is what all these chemicals are doing inside of the medicine. And then we're going to be able to know how to have that conversation when medicine works well with pharmaceutical drugs and when they don't. I could figure that out. All the medical literature was entering into a public space, and I was able to access certain things and be able to learn that language. And in learning all of that different language about how plant chemicals work and their physiological function inside of our body, I was able to learn a lot about the way that our body works. And there's even this really niche field of research where they being scientists in the field, will use plant chemicals to be able to understand more about how our own body works, to identify various pathways and their connections. You know, all of the endocrinology involved in this is very tremendous. And so I was always finding myself learning so much about how the human body works, and in order for me to learn what the medicine does, and in order for me to determine if it's going to be okay with a certain type of medication. And so learning pharmaceutical mechanism of action. So I was like in this conversation for, you know, the better part of 8 years with different health centers across the country, and getting us into a place where we can use plant medicine and pharmaceutical drugs together, or as an alternative form of care. And so always maximizing my impact. Any barrier that I came across, I would do everything that I needed to be able to break that barrier and improve access to health. And I did that for many years by increasing access to plant medicine. In some communities, it was religion. So I had to become like a theologue because in a lot of communities, the barrier, the most effective barrier preventing access to Indigenous healthcare or plant medicine was religion, and in really nuanced and unusual ways. But I said, okay, well, I'm going to learn what I need to know to be able to have that conversation and break down this barrier, because this is something that we need access to if we want to be happy and healthy. And so always maximizing my impact. And so now I got to a place where, yeah, I got into a program at York without an undergrad. I was in a graduate studies program, and I was doing research on just this, increasing access to Indigenous healthcare. And everything I did failed, because there's no way that we can ever, in an academic sense, prove to a physician that this is a successful form of therapy without a randomized controlled trial. Now, when we do a randomized controlled trial on a plant medicine, that has to be done in the public space, and the world is going to know about that medicine. Now I have experience with tens of thousands of people across the country. And so I have a very fair and fluent understanding of what that medicine is going to do inside of any cohort of individuals. And it's incredibly successful. Now the world learns about this success. Now there's a potential for plant species to become at risk. And so this cannot be done. So no randomized controlled trial, no justification or qualification of medicine as a appropriate form of therapy for our physicians. Dead thesis. I said, no, it's not going to be dead. I can't stop there. I have to publish something that is useful. So I started looking at other cultural components that can be utilized to be able to heal, to be able to help. And of all of my experience up until this point with medicine, I knew there's nothing that's going to be able to compare to the powerful nature of our medicine. So I looked at sweat lodges and sauna therapy. I looked at cryotherapy and our obsession or embrace of the cold, and our ability to kind of not shy away from the cold. You know, no Canada Goose parkas in September. From a cultural perspective, we embraced it and experienced it and loved it and adapted to it, lived with it. Within it. And so then I looked at other things too, like fasting, very important part of our culture, really amazing healing potentials, and opportunities there. But then also, you know, exercise as well. You know, what is a culturally appropriate exercise plan? What did Anishinaabe do to stay so healthy for thousands and thousands of years? Exercise wise, were they in the gym 8 hours a day, making sure that they're bench pressing no less than 300 pounds and or something like this, you know, or are they running 12 miles on the beach in the sand every day with 6-pack abs? And like, what did exercise look like from an ancestral perspective? What allowed us to be able to live and thrive as the species that we are for the last 350,000 years? What exercise did we engage in? What did that look like? And then also nutrition. So looking at nutrition, what did we eat, and what is our body where does our body derive nutrition from? And it wasn't until I opened that can of worms that it became really clear every single day that I spent in understanding what a culturally appropriate nutritional protocol would be, that I realized medicine, fasting, sweating, exercise, cryotherapy or embrace of the cold, all of these different cultural components, even combined, all bend the knee to nutrition and a proper nutritional intervention. And the reason why I'm saying this now is because of all of my experience with medicine, I started incorporating in my practice, because school was like one thing, one very, very small thing. But incorporating into my practice of teaching about medicine, that it started to become just teaching about health and learning about all of the things that we need to do that will augment the medicine's potential. And so I was working with this in practice, and in a lot of situations with a lot of different chronic disease, accelerated aging processes, and diabetes, things like this. It doesn't matter how much medicine, how much sauna, fasting, sweating, exercise, doesn't matter. You could take a person who is doing all of those things, and their opportunity to heal from diabetes, to heal from chronic disease, and to resist the accelerated aging process was minimal. It wasn't what I wanted it to be. It wasn't successful until we started incorporating nutritional protocols in as being primary. And it just so happened to be that, you know, when I'm visiting a community teaching about medicine, sometimes it can be very complex to learn how to harvest, not pick the poisonous ones, and prepare it properly. You apply too much heat in the drying process, it's useless. If you brew it too hot, you boil it, all the medicine evaporates, it becomes useless. You got to be like very technical with this process. And if you do it wrong, it's useless. And so there's lots and lots to learn about how to properly use medicine. So it wasn't very, very accessible for a lot of people. Going into a sauna can be comfortable, but to stay in it for a prescribed amount of time, to be able to achieve proper therapy is an incredibly uncomfortable procedure. Cryotherapy, embracing the cold, it's uncomfortable. Exercise hurts, injury, prone to injury. And then you have fasting, like not eating. It's incredibly uncomfortable. All of it is incredibly uncomfortable. And so the adherence was so low that my opportunity to have an impact on an individual or on a community or on policies in communities and in health centers was very, very minimal. It wasn't until we started really teaching about nutrition that we saw that this is by far the most impactful thing. So it deserved a lot of focus. So for the past 6 years, been dedicating most of my time and understanding, time into understanding nutrition. And so everything that I'm going to share with you today is really a culmination of all of these things, really kind of exploded at the beginning of the pandemic, because now I can't go to a community. I can't provide medicine. I can't teach about very fluently about all of these different things, all of these other cultural components. And so I relied heavily on nutrition. And you see that huge shift in our social media. From constantly and always only teaching about medicine, incorporating a couple little things here and there, to all of a sudden the pandemic hits and I'm focused exclusively on nutrition, because I understand that this is the most powerful intervention that anybody could ever consider in an opportunity to be able to heal. And I appreciate the disclaimer. And we're going to have a lot of fun. I have a whole bunch to go through, and Buddy there was always talking about how fast he was nervous about talking too fast and running out of time, and I'm panicking because I have what's really simple though. Okay, so just understand that everything that I'm doing, everything that I'm going to be sharing today is all to generate a discussion. I want to visit, I want to chat, I want to have conversations with anybody and everybody. And so immediately following the presentation in our Q&A discussion period, or anytime afterwards, if you just send me an email, find us on social media, send us a message anywhere, I will have this conversation with anybody at any time. And I would say anywhere, but probably just on Zoom. Because this is very, very important. And there's nothing that I am able to learn more from than having a conversation with, especially with folks who have clinical experience. And so I've been, under the radar, I guess, racking up a pretty substantial, I guess I can't qualify this as clinical experience, but experience in these. And a lot of it is being published to our YouTube channel. So you can go on there and learn a little bit more about all of the details that we're going to cover today, to get the detailed version of it on our YouTube channel if you wanted. But yeah, we're just going to talk about diabetes. It's actually pretty simple. I spent years overcomplicating diabetes, talking about insulin resistance cascades and in the pathophysiology of the disease, getting really lost in literature that is related to metabolic disease, and eventually diabetes, type 2 diabetes. So I could really simplify it. It's because it's actually quite easy. We don't need to get lost in the details. All we need to understand is that diabetes is just chronically uncontrolled blood sugar, blood glucose. That's it. Diabetes is only when you cannot control your blood sugar. It doesn't matter by what mechanism, if it's type 1, type 2, type 3, type 4, type 3.5, or like however many different distinctions that it has now. All it is an inability to control blood sugar. And so the fastest and easiest way to immediately eliminate diabetes forever, starting today and starting tomorrow, is the removal of carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are not essential in any way. We could go, it is according to our biological design to go throughout our entire lives, from the beginning right until the end, without ever engaging in 1 gram of one carbohydrate ever. So we could eliminate this. And what happens the next day is blood glucose is controlled. What happens the next day is your A1Cs begin to go down. And if you do this in 3 months, your A1Cs can go from 18 to 5. It will go from 11 to 5 in 3 months. Your diagnoses is removed. There's a lot of stories on our YouTube channel already about this, but since then, I've probably recorded maybe 3 dozen interviews of people, of Indigenous people who eliminated carbohydrates, sort of heeded to this advice and protocol and said, okay, well, if it's that simple, I'm going to try, I'm going to do it. And they're just emotional wrecks in all of those interviews, which is why they're not released on our YouTube channel, is because just out of respect for the individual who says, hey, you know, maybe in a couple months from now, I could try recording that again, where I'm not just going to lose all my marbles and ball my face off for 25 minutes, because what happens with them is they have incredible blood glucose control since day one. Eliminate carbohydrates today, tomorrow, your blood sugar is within normal range for the entire day. And your A1Cs will start to go down. If theoretically, if you did A1Cs every single day, it'd be a really silly idea. But over the course of 3 months, that average blood sugar goes right down to absolutely normal. And the reason why they're an emotional wreck is because they can't believe that they've never been told this before. They're thinking about their family, the dozens of family members that they lost to diabetes-related complications. You know, when you get an amputation, your life expectancy is less than 5 years after your first amputation. People going through dialysis, you know, you can't tickle your grandpa's feet or your auntie's feet because their neuropathy is so painful. Of all of these conditions, and the thinking of all these people and all their communities and all of the time and resources and energy that's dedicated to helping a community heal from diabetes. And it was this simple, yeah, for them. As simple as one step. It's a very difficult step, removing carbohydrates, but that was the one rule. And when properly adhered to, it's over. Diabetes is over. And I'm just completely consumed and overwhelmed with the successes of this very simple strategy. So let's talk a little bit more about carbohydrates. You know, because your body needs a certain amount of sugar inside of the blood at all times to feed red blood cells, specific types of nerves, specific types of kidney cells, and then especially your brain. All of these rely on sugar, your brain being the biggest sugar hog. We require, on average, for different types of people, obviously everybody's different sizes, but about 150 grams of carbohydrates a day is what your body needs. So thankfully, over the past 4.5 million years, we have developed an incredible ability to create our own sugar via a process called gluconeogenesis. Gluco, sugar, new, genesis, creation of. Gluconeogenesis, the creation of new blood sugar. You could use a multitude of different amino acids or proteins as a substrate to create sugar. Lactate as a byproduct of exercise is turned to sugar faster than if you were to exogenously consume sugar syrup. And then as well, utilizing fat, you know, taking a triglyceride, a fat molecule, taking the 3 fatty acids off, utilizing those directly for energy, but converting that glycerol backbone into the sugar that we need to keep our blood sugar stable and normal. And so there is no need to ever consume sugar. To have sugar exogenously or dietary amounts of sugar is all completely inappropriate to every aspect of our biology, every part of our metabolic systems. And sugar should always be a demand-driven process, never dictated in any way by supply, by eating it. Keep it demand-driven, your blood sugar stays at the genetically determined level forever. Throughout your entire life. So yes, all sugar and all carbohydrate is biologically inappropriate. That's the premise, the basis of this entire presentation is dedicated into understanding any exogenous or eating of sugar is inappropriate to every part of our biology. One of the most immediate ways that we can understand this is by looking at something as simple as antioxidants. One of the biggest insults to our body, one of the biggest generators of inflammation, one of the biggest, not the biggest, but one of the biggest generators of inflammation, are reactive oxygen species, are just a byproduct of a disruption to our redox balance. It's called the reactive oxidative potential of our body. And the biggest insult to our body's redox balance, that what causes the most need for antioxidants is hyperglycemia, when your blood sugar is too high. And for a lot of people, this is between 7 and 9, when most of the incredible amounts of damage occur when our blood sugar is above 9. But anywhere above 7, there is a disruption, severe disruption to your redox balance. Now your body has to make a whole bunch of antioxidants to be able to mitigate all the damage that the extra sugar has caused. And so your body creates its own antioxidants. You do not receive antioxidants from plants. This is just inappropriate. All of this research was done in test tubes, and is not applicable to the human body, and is not understood at all as it pertains to the human body. So antioxidants are not derived from what you put inside of your mouth. They are created inside of your liver. Even if you did use antioxidants from plants, they're relatively useless, because they're only able to scavenge a certain amount of reactive oxygen species before they come full. And the scale is developed at Guelph University. The ORAC score is where they measure how much junk an antioxidant can absorb or neutralize or whatever. And it's nothing compared to what your liver makes. The antioxidant enzymes that your liver makes, glutathione, hemioxygenases 1 and 2, catalase, superoxide dismutase, these antioxidant enzymes that your liver makes are able to scavenge millions of, not 2,500 like blueberries or 64,000 like rosemary extracts, or any other said plant antioxidant, chaga even being sometimes above 1 million, being the most powerful antioxidant that's ever been tested in a test tube. The antioxidants that your liver makes are able to scavenge millions, that's plural, millions of reactive oxygen species every hour, and they stay alive and active for days. So the potential is just not comparable anyways. And so you don't need to use plants as a source of antioxidants. And so what happens is, you could just think about it from this perspective. If you're eating sugar, the amount of antioxidants that your body has to make to clean up all of the damaging effects of the sugar meal that was just eaten, is you're spending all of your antioxidant potential on hyperglycemia, when those antioxidants could and should be spent on managing chronic disease, keeping certain cancer pathophysiologies at bay, doing what they're supposed to do, not just dealing with all of the extra sugar and damage caused by that. So when you eliminate the sugar, now guess what all of those antioxidants get to do all day, every single day? Clean up the mess, and help begin to heal some of the more chronic issues that have been accumulating over the course of our life. So one of the biggest things that I wanted to talk about today is when we're looking at diabetes and understanding that we are a carbohydrate intolerant species, that any amount of carbohydrates is inappropriate. That means any amount and any type. There's this really interesting idea that there are good carbohydrates and bad carbohydrates. That there's good carbohydrates to have if you're a diabetic. You look to the glycemic index scale, right? And you want to be able to identify this a healthier carbohydrate and focus more on those. And the reality is when you look into every study that was ever used to be able to create the idea of a glycemic index scale, the idea that there's good carbohydrates and bad carbohydrates, this is built on the most junk science you could ever imagine. So what they do is look at, this is taken from the diabetes.ca website, what studies used to create the glycemic index scale. These are some of the results that you're going to get. And I can't go into the details of every single one, but one of the things that we can and should immediately realize is that this was a study done where they were trying, refined carbohydrates, like white bread is going to be worse than brown bread, right? Well, the study proved the exact opposite, that it, in some instances, the brown bread was more insulinogenic and required more insulin to bring the blood sugars back down to normal. And there was a longer or larger area under the curve, meaning that these individuals were out of range longer with the brown bread than they were with the white bread. And they had a very mixed cohort of people, some athletes, some diabetics, some insulin resistant, some insulin sensitive, and found that, and you could see, and according to these graphs, is that they're the same, that white bread and brown bread are the same. A carbohydrate is a carbohydrate is a carbohydrate. And like I shared this on my social media, and I got over 800 replies from type 2 diabetics who were mad at what I was saying. And I probably got, 50 of those were from type 1 diabetics who all just laughed because they know you're still going to need insulin. And with a lot of different foods, there might be a kidney bean for a lot of people requires more insulin to be able to control the blood sugar than if that person just had sugar cubes. So the glycemic index scale and the idea that there's a good carbohydrate and a bad carbohydrate is fake. A lot of these studies were built upon confidence intervals of 4%, meaning it was wrong in 96% of the people. The only way that you could figure this out is if you ask that publisher for the raw data and interpret it yourself with the proper statistical analyses. So an incredible amount that I had to be able to learn to be able to decipher some of the research in these studies, but it became very, very clear that there's no such thing as a good or bad carbohydrate. They are all bad. They are all broken down into sugar eventually, and will all require a certain amount of insulin to be able to bring those blood sugars down, when that insulin can and should be spent on all of the other secondary, tertiary, and other reasons why we need insulin, not to spend it all on controlling blood sugar. Should be spent on electrolyte metabolism or electrolyte balance, and should be spent on the creation and maintenance of hormone production, etc. Right? So a carb is a carb is a carb. Doesn't matter what it's from or where it's from. It's all inappropriate. And the only way that you could ever figure out what your personal glycemic index scale is with wearable technology like a continuous glucose monitor. Then you could figure out which carbohydrates you tend to tolerate better than others. And anything that's pushing your sugars above 7 is going to be a carbohydrate that is going to result in a challenge that is too great to deem any carbohydrate as good. They are all biologically inappropriate. Regularly, well, I mean, I don't want to get into those details. So going back to carbohydrate elimination, you got to ask, like, what does this look like? Because what this ends up being is pretty much all plant matter can and will eventually become a carbohydrate, whether it's actually categorized or understood to be a carbohydrate, or if it's fiber. 10% of all fiber is going to be broken down into various substrates. And so when you're so what I'm talking about is a culturally appropriate nutritional protocol that is going to be able to achieve maximal amounts of healing, especially from the perspective of diabetes, is what makes this very, very clear. If you remove the carbohydrates, your diabetes is gone tomorrow, and it never comes back, and you never have to think about it again for the rest of your life. It's a premise of this presentation. And I want to explain to you the proof of why this is important to consider. Because what I am projecting, what I'm saying now, is that the human species is what is categorized as an obligate hypercarnivore. And this is according to the evolution of our species over the past 4.5 million years, and that we've occupied the speciation for 350,000 years. We've been Homo sapiens sapien around the world. And throughout this entire time, we've been eating nothing but meat and fat of animals. And so we could look to a couple different areas to be able to understand this more fluently. So when we're looking at anthropology, we could look at multiple different studies that are looking at what's called nitrogen 14-15 isotope analyses of long bones. And it's basically when you are eating protein, that protein is synthesized into your protein structures that last through the archaeological record are bones. And so in analyses of bones of human or non-human remains found anywhere in the world, you can take that tissue and you could determine the amount of plant-based protein and animal-based protein that individual is consuming because nitrogen 14 is what is synthesized into collagen tissue, into bones from plants. Nitrogen 15 is what's synthesized into collagen from animal protein. And you could even include sulfur and carbon isotope analyses in there to determine what species of animal that these isotopes were generated from. And so when you're looking at the nitrogen 14-15 isotope analyses, the plant protein versus animal proteins of human remains that predate the agricultural revolution, just 10,000 years ago, meaning all of our ancestors globally were surviving exclusively on megafauna, on mammoths, beavers the size of cars, mastodons. This was our primary substrate. This is what we ate to live for 340,000 years until all of those animals went extinct. When they went extinct, we start to use plants as our energy, as our fuel, and as our nutrition. And that came with a very severe burden. And that burden is what we refer to now as disease. And so with nitrogen isotope analyses, we are and have always been deriving all of the nutrition that we require from the meat and fat of animals. And this is just unequivocal evidence that in literature and in archaeology as it pertains to anthropology, that we were hypercarnivores and we were apex predators throughout our entire existence as the species. And we are still living in the bodies of mammoth hunters. We are still living in the bodies of mastodon hunters. And there's been no significant genetic changes other than the development of an amylase gene inside of our mouths that help break down some starches. But other than that, there's been no significant genetic changes. You are in the same body of the same human that was alive 350,000 years ago. And this is what we need to eat for. This is what we need to remember, who we are and how we need to eat. And so when I'm talking about ancestors, I'm talking about everybody before 10,000 years ago, because there was a giant cataclysmic event that caused the extinction of the megafauna, that we lost our food source and had to resort to plants, had to develop technology and culture and language to be able to utilize and create the technology needed to be able to process plant foods. So when we are looking at the anthropological evidence, the nitrogen 14-15 isotope testing, these can place human beings, to identify the human trophic level, whether we're herbivores, that means 50%, and if we're, I guess there's probably not too many people contesting that human beings are herbivores, but there is a lot of folks saying that we are omnivores. This is an individual that derives 50 to 60% of their nutrition from animal products. That is not us, according to the nitrogen isotope analyses. Carnivores are deriving 60 to 70% of their nutrition from animals. And this is not where humans are either. We are deriving always over 80% of the nutrition that we require from animals. And that only exists in equatorial regions of the world. The further north or south you go from the equator, the greater that ratio becomes, to the point where you're in the Great Lakes, it's 100%. We've been eating entirely animals and the meat and associated fat of animals throughout our entire existence here. And that puts us in the range of hypercarnivores. And there's obligate hypercarnivores and facultative hypercarnivores. This is, facultative carnivores can have a little bit of plants and derive some nutrition from those and subsist on them for a period of time. And everything from this presentation from here on is going to be explaining how we are not facultative carnivores, that we are obligate hypercarnivores, that we are designed to derive all the nutrition that we require from meat and fat of animals exclusively. So not facultative, obligate. And now, all we need to do to be able to really figure this out, because nitrogen isotope analyses, oh yeah, you know, scientists are always stretching back millions and millions of years, but like, you know, the proof gets, you know, the further back that you look in time, the more impossible to understand that it becomes, right? So never mind the nitrogen isotope analyses, even though I think that they're a very valid and accurate measurement. Let's just look at ourselves. Look at you. Look inside of your body. Who are you? And where are you designed to derive nutrition from? What are we supposed to be eating according to our biological design? Not according to any culture, not according to any language, not according to any isotope analyses. Let's just look at us right now, who we are. And so let's start from the mouth. All right, because everybody will always think like, oh, mouths, we have the mouths of a primate, like it's the same as a gorilla, as a chimp. They eat nothing but plants and they're fine. But the reality is that in order to understand what's going on with your mouth is, number one, the most toxic thing that you could ever put inside of your mouth is sugar. The only reason why you need a dentist, the only thing that causes dental cavities and caries and gingivitis are 3 types of bacteria that can colonize inside of your mouth. And those bacteria will cause the tooth decay. And those bacteria only eat carbohydrates as a source of energy. They convert those carbohydrates into lactic acid that wears away at your enamel in your teeth, and then eventually you have a carie or a cavity, and then you need teeth removed. And so just to see that sugar is one of the most toxic things, or the only toxic thing that you could ever introduce inside of your mouth, that makes us very different than primates. Primates eat nothing but plants and will never develop cavities and gingivitis and dental caries throughout their entire life. But the structure is the same. And one of the reasons why the structure is the same, why we don't have the mouth of a tiger, of a saber-toothed tiger, or we don't have the mouth of a lion, is because we don't hunt with our face. We hunt with sharp, pointy sticks, and we eat cooked food with forks and knives. Is the easiest way that I can explain it. I mean, there's no genetic selection pressures that are causing our mouth to change, because we don't need to hunt with our face like a cat. We hunt with sticks, and so there's no genetic selection pressures causing this remarkable need to change. And so it remains unchanged. We look like a primate still. It's not going to change until there is selection pressure selecting against that. We'll talk about that in a second. But you can look at your stomach acid as well. Your stomach acid is generally between 1 and 2, which is very, very acidic enough to dissolve a razor blade in minutes. Or 30 seconds, 30 to 45 seconds. That's how quickly your stomach acid should be able to dissolve a razor blade, which is really, really dramatic, right? Stomach acid of most carnivores are between 2 and 3. Stomach acid of most omnivores are between 4 and 5. And most herbivores live with a stomach acidity that is less than 5, or more basic than 5, which is 5 plus, I guess. And so in that perspective, when we're looking at our stomach acid, we have the stomach acidity of a scavenger, meaning that our stomach acid is so acidic that it's designed to destroy pathogens, like a scavenger, right? We're not designed to eat only fresh meat. We're designed to eat possibly fermented meat. And so you could imagine our ancestors who are getting a mammoth, a camp of 100 people can eat a mammoth for like 3 months. And during that 3 months, that part of that animal is going to start to go bad. It's going to start to grow pathogens. And so we develop strategies, cooking, and an incredibly acidic stomach to be able to deal with that problem. And so this is something that has been selected for not against. We've created a more and more stomach acid, strong stomach acid, until we're within the range of, yeah, what is now the stomach acidity of that of a scavenger. And that's just a biological reality. One of the other things that we'll always look to is gut morphology. So like a chimp and an ape, orangutans and sheep, and all kangaroos, all of these animals, they eat plants. All they do is eat plants, and they're perfectly fine. And it's because they all have long intestines, and humans have long intestines. But if you actually critically look at gut morphology and the comparative anatomy and physiology, compare our anatomy and physiology with other creatures to be able to determine what we are supposed to eat. This is all coming from the sad reality that there's no such thing as nutritional science, by the way. Nutritional science does not exist. Anybody who is citing any study that relates to human nutrition is citing non-science, like what we talked about with the GI scale. It doesn't exist. There's no science is interventional, and it is there's a certain amount of quality in interventional research, and there's just no way that any nutritional experiments will ever pass an ethics board. So there's no such thing as human interventional nutritional research. And so, yeah, what we have to look at then is comparative anatomy and physiology. Compare our gut morphology to that of other creatures, and you'll immediately understand that we're incredibly different. We're different because we do not have a foregut, like a stomach, that is designed to regurgitate and ferment our food before it enters the small intestine. It's just a gut with stomach acid, just breaking up proteins. That's it. And then in our small intestine is where we absorb rich, nutrient-dense foods from animal products. In your large intestine is where you absorb nutrient-poor plant products. And so the way that herbivores and omnivores are structured is they have a very short small intestine, because they don't eat much plants. I mean, they don't eat much animals. They're focusing mostly on plants. And so before their large intestine, they have a giant fermentation vat where they house trillions of bacteria, and all those bacteria break down the food into the proper biologically available appropriate forms. And then it's absorbed from there. And so that's in the beginning of the large intestine. And then the large intestine is massive. When you're looking at the human gut, yeah, we don't have a foregut that's designed to ferment or break down any products other than proteins. That enters into your small intestine, and your small intestine is about 70% longer than an orangutan. And your large intestine is 70% shorter than an orangutan, because we're designed to derive the nutrients that we require to be this species from animal products, not plant products. And you can see this in that we do not have a cecum. We do not have a giant fermentation vat in the beginning of our small intestine. What we have is called vestigial. It's a little flap called an appendix that does next to nothing. And so we're not designed. We have no faculty to be able to derive nutrition from plants. So you can see this in every single textbook as it relates to nutrition. Humans do not derive nutrition very well from any plant products. And it's because of our gut. And so gut morphology is very, very important to consider when you're looking at where do we derive nutrition from. Okay, I'm gonna just hammer through these last points real fast. But there's other things too as it relates to our body. You know, our fat cell size and the amount of fat cells that we have. We have very few but very large fat cells, whereas herbivores, plant eaters, omnivores will have a whole lot of very small fat cells. So they have a lot of them and they're very small. The exact opposite to us. Every carnivore, every hypercarnivore, and every obligate carnivore that has ever existed on this planet is going to have very large and very few fat cells, just like us, designed for fasting, designed for feasting and fasting. A couple days between kills is kind of just normal for us, whereas a lot of grazers cannot handle fasting. We have a bottleneck in the big fat cell that allows appropriate amounts of energy to get out. A chimp doesn't have that. A moose doesn't have that. All their fat is released so fast that they run themselves into starvation very, very quickly. So with comparative anatomy and physiology, especially as it relates to, you know, gut morphology, is we are generally more of a carnivorous biological specimen than most felines. And you know how much protein that your cats eat. We're designed to have more. Another way that we could look at this is just understanding metabolic systems and basics in organ function. So what that means is just looking at our body and how our body works. One of the most important things I think to remember is it's called the Randall cycle. I have multiple videos about this on my YouTube channel, and so do a lot of other teachers out there. But this is the basis of insulin resistance. Insulin resistance is a phenomenon. Physiological insulin resistance is a phenomenon that you only see in carnivores. And the reason why is because we're designed to go through periods where we're not eating. And so all of the sugar that's inside of our blood must be spared. And to be able to serve the red blood cells, to be able to serve the brain, the kidneys, the nerves, you know, everything that sugar needs to be able to eat. Since 1963, we've understood that in the human body, you're either burning glucose as energy or you're burning fats as energy. You can never burn both. They'll both blockade each other. So in the metabolism of glucose, the pooling of citrate in the cytosol results in melanoil-CoA that blocks fat from entering into the mitochondria, and all fat that enters into the cell is immediately transmuted into triglycerides. That's fat storage. That's fatness, obesity, and a major contributor to the diabetes and hypertension. And then also the same when we're burning fats as energy, you get this pooling of citrate that blocks phosphofructokinase and GLUT4 GLUT4 preventing the glucose from even entering into the cell. And if it does enter into the cell, it's just converted to glycogen. If you're not exercising and glycogen stores are full, it's just turned into triglycerides. That's fatness, fat storage. This means that any amount of carbohydrates that's associated with a high fat meal is just turned into fat. And also any amount of fats that's associated with a high carbohydrate meal is just all turned into fat as well. You're never able to burn both at the same time, ever. You're only burning one or the other. And there's nowhere in nature where you get a combination of fats and carbohydrates. Actually, the only place that you get a mixture of fats and carbohydrates together is in breast milk. And breast milk is designed to make you grow to get as fat as possible, as fast as possible. And here we are, every single meal that we have all day long. This is the idea that's pushed on us called a balanced diet. A balanced diet is not fit for an organism who developed in the ecological niche of an obligate hypercarnivore. A balanced diet is one of the worst pieces of advice that can ever be given to a human being. It is completely inappropriate. And what happens is, according to the Randall cycle and every other metabolic system and process that our body has and goes through, is that substrate is prevented from being able to enter into the mitochondria. And from there, you have a massive cascade of events that result in the most outrageous amounts of inflammation that drive every inflammatory disease, that drive the accelerated aging process. And when we look into nature and say, to realize that we are either burning fats or carbohydrates, and obviously from everything that I presented so far, we're designed to derive all the nutrition that we require from the meat and fat of animals that is outside the context of carbohydrates completely. When we do engage in carbohydrates, this is what happens. We activate the Randall cycle and are subjecting ourselves to the cascade, the negative cascade associated with that. We're designed to utilize fat as our substrate. And if we, yeah.
Sorry, Joseph, I don't mean to interrupt, but we've got a lot of questions building up and we got about 10 minutes left. So I'm wondering if you want to switch to discussion.
Okay, well, just 1 second.
Okay.
I'll just finish up this thought. Okay. So in looking at metabolic systems, we need to understand that the Randall cycle is a choice that we have to make, either choosing glucose as our substrate or fats. This should always be occurring 5 days apart from each other, preferentially with a fast in between. if we want to switch from one substrate to the other without activating the Randall cycle. If we're choosing the route of carbohydrates, we are subjecting ourselves to incredible nutritional deficiencies, because there is no plant that is going to give you a nutrient that you cannot get from an animal. There are 18 different nutrients that you can get exclusively from animals that you cannot get from plants. Vitamin A, B vitamins, D, E, K, choline, carnosine, carnitine, arachidonic acid, EPA, DHA, iron, every divalent cation that's associated with the phytic acid in plants. We're not going to absorb it. The only appropriate place that we're deriving nutrition from is from meat and fat. And some other parts, to this presentation, just before we bust into a discussion, is just looking at the basics of disease pathology. Pathophysiology, if you want to look at into the etiology of disease, where do diseases come from? Oral diseases we covered, metabolic diseases we covered, the accelerated aging process, autoimmunity, gut disease, heart disease, kidney diseases. Where do all of these diseases come from? They come from inflammation. Where does all this inflammation come from? Hyperglycemia. It comes from overactivation of the Randall cycle, and it comes from us choosing inappropriate sources of food. And so it's kind of like, yeah, time for us to look in nature and say, hey, this is who I am, and you're enough. I don't need to mix fats and carbohydrates to make a hyper palatable experience, this really good tasting food that separates from me, from my mental and emotional stresses and traumas. I don't need to be chronically engaging in these inappropriate foods to realize our biological place on this planet, being obligate hypercarnivores, and then eating to subserve this and these requirements. So this is a responsibility to eat like our ancestors, not just for our health, but for the health of our environment. There's no mammoths, there's no beavers the size of cars, there's no mastodons. Where can we achieve the macronutrient profile and micronutrient density of our ancestors? And I think one really cool and quick answer to that is regenerative agriculture, where this does not regenerative agriculture builds soil, it sequesters carbon, speeds up the methane cycle. It's very economical. Every regenerative ag farm that I have ever instructed a community to pursue has always been less than $5 a pound. $5 a pound at less than 2 pounds a day per person, per household, tends to be one of the most economical decisions as well. And so taking all of these things into consideration, the anthropology, the comparative anatomy and physiology, every metabolic system process that our body has and goes through, the disease pathology of almost every chronic disease, carbohydrates are a primary insult. And if we remove them, the diabetes goes away. It sounds super far-fetched, the idea to eliminate carbohydrates, but it's just simply eating in accordance to our biological design, which is ancestrally accurate, it's culturally appropriate, and it's specific to our species. Diabetes is a manifestation of our species-wide intolerance to carbohydrates. The day we begin to eat like our ancestors is the day that we eliminate diabetes, and we'll never have to think about it again for the rest of our lives. So we got some questions.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you very much, Joseph. Thank you for sharing all that. In the interests of keeping the agenda somewhat on track, we'll probably only just take about 5 minutes worth of questions discussion. I'll go according to how they were sent. So from Allison, are you including fruit in your term of carbohydrates, or are you referring more to flour, grain-based carbohydrates such as bread, pasta, crackers?
Yeah, sure. There's a spectrum of carbohydrate toxicity that also should be included within there. The spectrum of toxicity just with plants in general, fruit being the least toxic of the plant foods, still coming with a tremendous carbohydrate load and thus being biologically inappropriate any and every which way that you look at them.
Okay, thank you. I guess we'll just blast through these.
Let's do it.
From Renee, what if the patient is a type 1? How would eliminating carbs address their blood glucose levels?
So I get to work with a lot of type 1 diabetics, and what happens is usually most type 1 diabetics are able to produce a small amount of insulin. And when we eliminate carbohydrates, you're not spending all of that insulin controlling your blood sugar. It's able to do the proper things that it's supposed to do. It's controlling electrolyte balance. It's controlling the production of almost all of the hormones that make up who you are. And so with people who are completely dependent on insulin, who are on an insulin pump, you set that pump to basal, and that's where it stays. So much more control in the context of a type 1 diabetic as well. But yeah.
Okay. Just a reminder too that Joseph has a YouTube page and Facebook that you can probably follow up with him about too if we don't address your question in the chat today. Are organic meat and health food stores best for diabetics? From the Nick.
If it's from an animal, it's okay. And in relation to our environment and our responsibility to our environment, it is best to find regenerative agriculture. Every community that I've worked in, conducting our diabetes programming over the past 2 years, I've been able to find regenerative agriculture farms that will deliver to anybody in community or within the urban center at less than $5 a pound.
Awesome, thank you. From RD Diabetes, what about the strong link between saturated fat associated with animal products and cardiovascular disease?
Somebody's got to ask it. So cholesterol is caused by sugar, not, cardiovascular disease is caused by sugar, not cholesterol. So there's, even in literature, there's immediately upon the quickest Google search, there are 5 of the top meta-analyses done on saturated fat and the link to heart disease. Even within epidemiology is the connection is not there. So the top 5 meta-analyses say no. And if you look into the plausible mechanism of cholesterol and heart disease, you'll very quickly realize that this is a disease that is caused exclusively by hyperglycemia. Hyperglycemia, shrinking the endothelial cells. Well, first of all, destroying the glycocalyx, then shrinking the endothelial cells, allowing at an arterial bifurcation for the LDL particle, the protein containing cholesterol, to sink in behind the shrunken, damaged, glycated endothelial cells from sugar. Then what happens is that LDL particle becomes glycated by sugar or vegetable seed oil metabolites. And when it oxidizes, it's attacked by macrophages. It turns into a foam cell, becomes the atherosclerotic streak, becomes a plaque in the blockers that blocks your blood vessels. It has nothing to do with cholesterol. It has everything to do with the damage caused by sugar. You eliminate the sugar, you remove the insult. This tissue is able to heal finally. And it's actually the mechanism of our cardiovascular system medicines is to protect your blood vessels temporarily from the toxic effects of sugar. Something that we could do right now, all of us, without medicine. Medicine is sometimes a far greater teacher than it is a therapy.
Okay, we'll just do 2 last ones very quickly. What does cholesterol look like with an all-protein diet?
When you are deriving all of the nutrition you require from the meat and fat of animals, your cholesterol goes sky high. Yeah. And which is appropriate. Cholesterol is a necessary nutrient. It makes up 50% by weight of every cell inside of your body. It is the backbone that every hormone is built upon. It's required. Your liver is an enzyme in your liver, HMG-CoA reductase, that is responsible for maintaining a genetically determined cholesterol level in your blood. Meaning if you eat less cholesterol, your liver just makes more cholesterol. If you start eating more cholesterol, your liver makes less cholesterol and can spend all of its energy doing what it's supposed to do. And so your cholesterol goes sky high, but when your A1Cs are 4.5 to 5, when your HbA1c level of inflammation or your HSCRP measurement of inflammation inside of your body is immeasurable, when insulin is, your C-peptide is 0.2, when almost immeasurable, when your triglycerides are low, your HDL is sky high as well. Based with high cholesterol is inconsequential to health when all other parameters are kept low, especially inflammation. You take high cholesterol when somebody who is inflamed, who has an A1C of 15, that has their trigs are hundreds, then yeah, there's going to be a problem. When you remove the insult, the amount of healing that is applied to every other blood lipid panel that can possibly be assessed, all of those other metrics are going to be low. Cholesterol is going to be high, which is a good thing. It's needed, which is why the slew of side effects associated with HMG-CoA reductase inhibitors, statin drugs. What are the consequences of lowering cholesterol? Look at the consequences of long-term statin use.
Okay, one last one.
Okay. Find a good one.
Yeah, okay, I got a good one for you. Based on your theory, how do you explain why Indigenous communities didn't have diabetes until the 1940s? Living off the land, a balance of both plants and animals, our ancestors were very healthy before colonization.
Oh, that's a pretty good one. So yeah, define healthy. And because one of the things that the amount of data that we have with Indigenous groups in North America is very, very limited. But when we look in other parts of the world too, like there was Otzi the Iceman in France or something, like 6,000-year-old body that was perfectly preserved, had a belly and intestines full of grains, full of agriculture-based foods. And he was an atherosclerotic mess. He was a heart attack that was waiting to happen, maybe even died from a heart attack. And so looking at ancient peoples as a metric to determine as a metric to be able to determine health, one of the things that I can confirm and say is that according to the archaeological record in North America, 10,000 years ago, upon the extinction of the megafauna, that's the only time that you begin to see dental caries, fish ears and bones, signs of osteoporosis, and chronic disease. Begins in us when we deviate away from the natural human diet. And so we were able to remain quite healthy throughout the 10,000-year absence or separation from us and our traditional food sources. But that health should not be responsible for the weight that's controlling this decision. I think one of the places that we could look right now is in what happens to people when they begin consuming an exclusively carnivorous diet. What happens to their diabetes? What happens to their risks of other chronic diseases? What happens to their mood? What happens to their satiety signals? What happens to their mental health? What happens to their susceptibility to addictions? I have, so all kinds of really amazing videos on my YouTube channel. If you wanted to learn more, there's a couple things here and there. A lot more coming in the future. This giant bank of things to upload to kind of orient ourselves towards this way of eating. But yes, I would immediately call the past 8,000 years of engaging in plants as I would have to call this, biologically inappropriate and not responsible for the ability to achieve the health that we're capable of, and the healing that's required now with us right now. But yeah, I really appreciate those questions, and I really, really appreciate this platform to be able to share some of these ideas. Hopefully, at least we got our ears perked up and have a lot of things to consider anyways. Like I said in the beginning, this is my favorite conversation with anybody. I would open up a Zoom room in a heartbeat anytime to be able to have this discussion. If there's any other questions about anything, every Sunday from 6:30 to 8:30, I have an open, free, full, no form, just conversations about nutrition, where I share these ideas, work through questions from an audience of registrants that's over 800 now, to share some of these ideas to make it possible, to make it accessible. On those Sunday night nutrition sessions, a lot of other folks will share their stories, their personal stories, what happened to them and their diabetes, what happened to their high blood pressure. And that serves as a really good motivation for us to consider this as a very valid therapy and practice against, to heal from and prevent diabetes and other chronic disease.
Great.